Welcome to the 700 Club. Israel's military is making major gains as it pushes deeper into Gaza City. The IDF captured a key Hamas terrorist base which used to plan the deadly October 7th massacre.
For the first time since the war began, Israel has now agreed to limited humanitarian pauses. Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told Fox News that the pauses that the White House announced will be limited and only in different neighborhoods so that civilians can get away. But he again made clear there will be no ceasefire until all the hostages are released.
No, the fighting continues against the Hamas enemy, the Hamas terrorists, but in specific locations for a given period of a few hours here, a few hours there, we want to facilitate a safe passage of civilians away from the zone of fighting.
So far, thousands of Gazans have been able to flee the fighting in the north to safer areas in the south. Netanyahu also said Israel doesn't have a timetable for its prosecution of the war.
I've set goals. I didn't set a timetable because, you know, it can take more time. I wish it'll take little time. But we're proceeding step by step, reducing our casualties in the process, trying to reduce and minimize civilian casualties and maximize the casualties of the Hamas terrorists. And so far, I think it's proceeding well.
For the first time, the Israeli Defense Forces Chief of Staff entered deep into the heart of the Gaza Strip. The Israeli military captured one of Hamas's main bases, which it used to plan and prepare for the October 7th massacre. The IDF showed some of Hamas's facilities and weapons are located next to schools, kindergartens, medical clinics, and mosques. And the role of the media has become an issue again, after the media watchdog group posted a photo of freelance photographer Hassan Elysia being kissed by Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar on October 7th. After the expose of freelance journalists on the scene of the massacre, who have worked for publications like AP, CNN, and the New York Times, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted, "These journalists were accomplices in crimes against humanity. Their actions were contrary to professional ethics." The news services said they had no idea of any advanced knowledge of the attacks, and AP and CNN cut ties with him. But Alex Trayman, Jerusalem bureau chief of the Jewish News Syndicate, tells CBN News Hamas uses the mainstream media for its own purposes. For instance, when its Ministry of Health claims so far 10,000 civilians have been killed.
Hamas has every incentive to try to inflate the number of civilians that are killed in Gaza to create this appearance of a humanitarian disaster that Israel is causing.
Trayman says it fits Hamas's media warfare.
The information arena is one of the most important battlefields for Hamas in this conflict. Once Hamas attacks with rockets, so Israel is forced to attack back. And when Israel attacks back, well, that's when it all started. And that's when the civilian death counts start to be counted and reported. And that this pressure creates a lot of diplomatic, delegitimization of the state of Israel. And that is really what Hamas is hoping to achieve. They want the international community to demonize and delegitimize the state of Israel.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, most Palestinians back Hamas in their fighting against Israel, though there's disagreement over just how deep that support is. And it could be crumbling as Israeli forces have hit Gaza hard in their war against terrorism. Dale Hurd has that story.
Public protests against Hamas in Gaza are rare. However, this clip from the BBC on social media shows a woman in Gaza cursing the dogs of Hamas for her suffering. Before someone can be seen covering her mouth. There are Palestinians in Gaza who don't support Hamas, but polls have shown that most, in fact, do, or at least they did before Hamas brought misery and death to their doors. A project called Whispered in Gaza interviews Palestinians secretly and claims that most do not support Hamas, but says Palestinians are afraid of being killed if they speak out publicly.
وطبعا انت كمواطن غزاوي ان عرضت الحرب قلت بديش حرب فانت خاين.
Corey Gill-Schuster, a Canadian Israeli, has also been interviewing Palestinians as well as Israelis for his YouTube channel, The Ask Project. and has asked many Palestinians about Hamas. Schuster says every Palestinian he's interviewed on camera has backed Hamas, but he also wonders if they were all telling the truth.
I assume that in a lot of the videos, people are answering me thinking, what is the best thing to say that I will be safe? Do they actually believe it if they say harsh things like, yes, we should kill the Jews, we need to expel the Jews? I'm sure to a certain extent, but it is hard to know how much of that extremism is public pressure. It's impossible to know. Privately, with a few, and a very few, have I heard them say, yes, we have done a lot of damage to ourselves. They tell me this privately, they won't say it publicly. It's considered treasonous. They could be killed for it.
However, Schuster also does not think most Palestinians are secretly peace-loving. This Palestinian said he favored dropping a nuke on Tel Aviv. And polls have shown solid support for Hamas not only in Gaza but also in the West Bank, where the Palestinian Authority is in charge.
The Palestinian Authority is seen as weaklings, and they do nothing against the Israelis. They are considered puppets of the Israelis, according to almost all Palestinians. And at least Hamas and Islamic Jihad fight the Israelis. And most Palestinians want there to be resistance. They want there to be violent resistance against the Israelis.
Samer Mohammed grew up in a Palestinian refugee camp in Lebanon. Now a Christian living in the U.S., Samer says that he, like other Palestinians, was brainwashed to hate Israel and believes the chief problem is Islam.
Every Palestinian, he have a goal. And his goal to die for Allah, to die for Palestine. My brother, if you don't have anything to lose, if you are poor, everything darkness, this is the problem. We need to tell them about the Messiah, about Yeshua.
Unfortunately, Schuster's extensive interviews with Palestinians have shown him that most support Hamas because they hate Jews and want them to die. And he's not optimistic that that will change anytime soon. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, with us now from Washington, D.C. is Jonathan Schanzer with the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. So let's get right to it. Some people say Israel's invasion of Gaza will actually produce more radicals, more people against them. But you think it could make Palestinians and others in the Middle East actually respect Israel. Could you tell us more?
Sure. I think, what we have right now is the possibility for a complete and total victory. In other words, the utter vanquishing of Hamas. We've actually not really seen a war of that kind in the Middle East in years. I mean, I would argue that maybe 1991, the Gulf War, was the last time the U.S. has had a total victory in the region. The Israelis have an opportunity right now to completely defeat Hamas. It will be a game changer. I think it will get the attention of Israel's enemies, and it will get the attention of Israel's allies as well. There's a reason why we've seen normalization take place across the Middle East. A lot of these countries in the region find Israel's strength very attractive. They understand that Israel is the regional power that they need to align with to combat the forces of, say, Iran. So there is an opportunity here, even as dangers lurk, even as we see potential for radicalization. I do think the potential for victory is quite important.
Is there a potential for victory in the ideology? I've heard it for decades now. The Palestinians calling for the destruction of Israel. I've heard it for decades coming out of Iran. Hezbollah, Hamas, the current call, it's amazing, on the streets of London and New York and college campuses from the river to the sea. I know what that means. It means the eradication of Israel and the death of all the Jews living there. So if that's the ideology, even if there's a tremendous military victory, will it change it?
Well, look, I think there is value in proving the futility of those calls. In other words, this rhetoric is undeniably annihilationist, right? They are calling for the annihilation of a nation of 10 million people. And this nation, rather than dying quietly, has decided to stand up against its enemies. And they're starting with the enemy in the Gaza Strip. But I will say here, I don't think that it ends in Gaza. I think there's actually a good chance, perhaps not in the next month or even the next year, but I think there's a good chance that we see clashes between Israel and Hezbollah. Israel is going to need to set the record straight here. After years of allowing a number of its enemies to grow, they are going to have to start to win against those enemies. I think we're seeing that now. And I think the more winning that takes place on the battlefield, the more that some of these vociferous critics of Israel that are based in capitals all around the Western world, I think they're going to realize the futility of their calls for annihilation.
Well, let's talk about the public relations battle. It seems that Hamas had a coordinated PR campaign and trying to get sympathy from Western media. It's amazing to me that publications, even the New York Times, was fooled by the Gaza Ministry of Health. Even though it's clear it's a propaganda arm of Hamas, they planted a false story about bombing a hospital. Their death tolls are taken at face value with nobody looking behind it. So how big of a problem is Israel's PR problem?
Look, it's a big problem, and I think Hamas has a lot of the sympathy. By the way, I would also attribute this more broadly to the Muslim Brotherhood movement, which Hamas is a splinter of the Muslim Brotherhood. It gets significant support, and this is really one of the largest kind of Islamist activist organizations in the world. There are literally tens of millions of people that are out there advocating for Hamas, and you can absolutely see it penetrate the American media, the Western media, and so the coverage is slanted. I do think, though, that there is an opportunity right now for Israel. I think we've got a pretty good grasp on the military situation inside the Gaza Strip, where more than a handful of hospitals inside the Gaza Strip are doubling as military command centers. If Israel can surround these places, not bomb them, but actually, stop the tunnels from being operational, and then ultimately demand the surrender of the Hamas fighters within, the images that could come from these scenes at various hospitals around the Gaza Strip, I think there is some very important visual evidence to convey right now to the West. I don't think the average American, the average viewer of television in the Western world understands the extent to which Hamas has wielded human shields throughout the Gaza Strip. There is an opportunity, I think, to flip the script, so to speak, and to begin to show the truth of what is happening inside the Gaza Strip.
Well, I'm all for flipping the script. It's incredible. The head of Hamas he's convicted of murdering 4 Palestinians for, quote, collaboration with Israel. And you look at how can there ever be peace where if you advocate for peace, you say, yes, Israel has a right to exist, and can we get on with our lives too and stop this? All that happens to you is you get executed. It's absolutely incredible, and it's an ideology that has been on perpetrating itself. Let's talk about Israel, and it seems like they were deceived by Hamas, that somehow Hamas was now looking to build Gaza. They thought Hamas was on the sidelines, and at the same time, Hamas was clearly building up forces for a horrific attack. So is this the same with Hezbollah? Is this the same of letting a threat grow while you think you have it solved?
Look, I think, the Israelis clearly had an intelligence collapse as it relates to the 10/7 attack. There was, I think, a broad misunderstanding across the intelligence community. There was an assessment that Hamas wanted to prevent conflict from reaching the Gaza Strip, that it was trying to export violence to the West Bank, for example, or that the leader of Hamas in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, was more dedicated to providing services to his people. That was an information operation that the Israelis succumbed to, and I think they paid a severe price, and we're now watching the war as a result. What is happening in Lebanon is, I think, very different. The Israelis have no illusions about who Hezbollah is and what it is that they plan to achieve. This is an organization that has roughly 10 times the firepower of Hamas. They have precision-guided munitions. They've got drones. They've got an army that has trained alongside Iran and Russia. There has been, I think, a steady drumbeat of reports suggesting that conflict could break out at any moment over the last month or so. I think there is still a better than average chance that Israel may need to escalate with Hezbollah. They've been firing something like a dozen or 24 anti-tank rockets into Israel every day during this conflict since October 8th. So I think the Israelis have no illusions of who they're dealing with, and they've always been focused on the very severe threat coming out of Lebanon. I do have concerns for a multi-front war. I think that's why the U.S. has sent its carrier strike groups to the region. There is an attempt to try to prevent a wider conflagration, which of course could be disastrous for Israel, but disastrous also for the rest of the region. So you see the U.S. trying to contain that. I do wonder whether at some point Israel says, hey, you know what, we're already mobilized and Hamas is virtually defeated or entirely defeated. We have our army mobilized and perhaps it's time to take the fight to Hezbollah and to end this once and for all. It'll be very interesting to see what happens after a week or two more of fighting in the Gaza Strip.
Well, thanks for the insight, Jonathan, and thanks so much for being with us today.